Okay, are we? Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of On Oshkosh. I'm your host, Cheryl Hentz. Very pleased to be joined tonight by an old friend and someone who's familiar to, I think, probably everybody in the Oshkosh area. We have current Oshkosh Mayor and Council Member Lori Palmeri, and she is our only guest tonight. Lori is running for the 54th Assembly District seat that is being vacated by Gordon Hintz. He's served, how many years has he served?
I think it's 16.
Wow, that's a lot. But Gordon, you know, his family's expanding and he wants to take some time and enjoy his kids while they're young and growing up. So he is not seeking re-election. So Lori is the Democratic person who's running for this seat. There had been another person who has decided to drop out, so they're not even really worth talking about. And then Donnie Herman is the Republican challenger. And I, just for full disclosure, I tried getting in touch with Mr. Herman. The phone number that was provided does not work. I tried it a couple of different times. It's a non-working number, at least when I tried. I sent him an email, and I got no response back from Mr. Herman. So that's a little bit problematic for me, and Lori and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but you know, when someone sends you an email, I don't care what it is, but in this case, it's to give someone a free forum for an hour where they can talk about their platform, what their issues are, you know, what they hope to accomplish if they win election and are sworn into office, and that kind of thing. And so I'm offering that to them. I don't have to, but I am. And if they don't have the common courtesy and the professionalism to at least respond back in some shape, form, or fashion, then I don't know that I would trust that individual, in this case, Mr. Donnie Herman, to adequately and professionally represent me should he get elected. So he's not here. He will not be here. I should not have to chase after someone. So I am no longer extending an invitation to Donnie Herman. But welcome, Lori.
On that note.
I had to get that out because I just think when somebody, I don't care if they're selling something and, you know, they're reaching out to you with, you know, saying, I'd like to buy this or whatever it is, if someone sends you an email or leaves you a voicemail, it's, you know, I realize we're old school here, but common courtesy still has to play into this. And people should, this is just my opinion, and I'm going to get off my soapbox here in a moment, but I think that whatever it is, they should respond. They should have the common courtesy to respond. And, you know, when they don't, that, to me, shows a little bit about what their, I guess, what their character is and that kind of thing. And so I would not vote for someone like that. So anyway, but you're throwing your hat in the ring.
I am.
Now, let me ask you this. Aaron, how do you pronounce his name? Wojciechowski. Okay. He serves on the city council with you, and he was originally going to run. He would have been the Democratic, you know,
primary challenger.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So now that he has essentially dropped out, you're the only candidate right now?
On the Democratic side.
Yes.
Yes.
So will there be then? There would be no reason.
My name will still be on the ballot, but you are not going to have, you know, Aaron's name on there as well.
So there will still be a primary?
Well, there is a primary anyway, right? Because we have, you know, other races
for other
that
races,
are going.
But I mean, for this,
yeah, I was learning that myself. That yes, my name will be on there. So, there you go. Another box to check.
Yeah, no, just circle.
Circle. Excuse me. Yes.
And we don't check boxes. So, okay, well, that's good. So I will just put this out there right away then that I don't want to get tangled up in my mic. So the primary election, and as Lori and I just said, there are other issues on the ballot. So the primary election is Tuesday, August 9th, and the general election is on Tuesday, November 8th. And if you're watching this elsewhere in the state or the country, those dates may be a little bit different. So just check with your own local clerk, whether it's city clerk, town clerk, whatever. And also, if you have not registered to vote or you've moved and you want to make sure that you can vote, in the proper district or ward, you should contact your city, town, or municipal clerk and find out. You can also handle a lot of things online, including registering to vote absentee ballot. And you can find a lot of information at vote.gov. Very simple.
Or My Vote Wisconsin, or My Vote WI.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
as well.
The vote.gov kind of leads you to that one.
That one, right, yes.
But, so either way. And what was that one again, Lori?
My Vote WI.
My Vote
.gov.
WI, yeah. So myvotewi.gov. Okay. Well, there we have it. And we're going to have Lori's website and so forth up throughout the show, but it is, if you're listening to this on radio, no, it's not going to be on radio because it's a political thing, so I stand corrected. But it is palmeriforassembly.com. So let us talk about why you're doing this.
Yes. Well, as you mentioned, Gordon has decided not to seek re-election, and I am running for the people. I have served this city as mayor and a council member going on 6 years. I have the experience of that service. I also have gained a reputation for speaking of responsiveness. I've gained a reputation for being responsive.
Absolutely.
Reliable, results focused, and those 3 R's are pretty important, I think. They go all the way back to my first campaign as council member. And I believe that, Gordon established that reputation as well as being his office being responsive and connected. I believe that as a daughter of working class citizens and a working mom and grandmother, I'm in tune with the citizens of Oshkosh and their needs. I am not interested in playing political games, but I am interested in solving problems. And I've been joking around with folks at different events. I'm a grandmother with grit, a loaded fanny pack, ready to go to Madison. So bring it on. But basically, I will take those 3 R's, those values of responsiveness, reliability, and results focus to fight in Madison every day for the Oshkosh community. Yeah.
And and I will give you props because as a citizen, I have come to you with things over the years. And I've come to you, Lori, for a couple of different reasons. Number one, because we don't socialize necessarily, but I consider us to be friends, and so I'm going to put that full disclosure out there as well. But you became a friend because you were Tony Palmeri's wife, and Tony hosted this show at one time with me, and then he got elected to the Common Council, and we thought, maybe not. But also, I started coming to you as a constituent, and I saw how well you responded to things,
Well, and you're being really humble, too. You've served on a lot of boards and commissions. You have given a lot of public service. And I think when people have those shared values, they do become close. Mm-hmm. Whether or not you socialize outside or not, that service brings you together. And so I think you have to give yourself a lot of credit for the service and that eye on Oshkosh accountability.
Well, thank you. We were just talking about how long the show's been on the air, and we started this in 2002, and after about 10 years or so, I just kind of needed a break, and I thought that it was going to be done, and I ended it, and then people said, no, you need to come back, you need to do this again. So after a year of nothing, we started up again, and then we lost a little bit of ground. We lost about a year and a half with the COVID thing. but otherwise it's been nonstop. And if people go to YouTube and then they type in, Eye on Oshkosh, they will bring up every single show that we've ever done. And it's amazing to see how people have changed over the years,
I know. I was
myself.
going back and looking at some of the old ones because I remember too when I first moved to Oshkosh, reading the Eye on Oshkosh blog. Kind of the summary of what you would have on the show, and then I learned about the show later. But certainly appreciate that you coming back. And I've learned a lot from different segments that you've had over the years, whether it be someone from the ADRC or, another public figure or issues that you just get interested in. I love connecting with people who, like myself, are curious about their community and learning more and taking that deeper dive.
Yeah.
But certainly, I have to say, I do feel like those experiences that I've gained, not just in the elected official, but also in the neighborhood advocacy work, in connecting with my other, service groups, the experience and accomplishments that I may not necessarily focus on until it's campaign time, right? It's like taking inventory of what's been done, because it seems like my eye is always on what needs to be done right now and what needs to be done in the future. And so, a lot of times you get asked, well, what about the accomplishments? And so it's kind of a challenge to think back, oh, yes, we championed a creation of a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. I recruited and appointed a wide variety of citizens to our 23 boards and commissions.
Including me. You put me on a couple.
Helped generate a support for the Sawdust District improvements as the chair of the Redevelopment Authority, facilitated through some really tough times civil, productive city council meetings with that focus on transparency and citizen input, being responsive to advocate for citizens with this eye on equity on the allocation of our public resources, and that's really important. That's like part of the budget discussion.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff, but I think it's important for people to understand, because so many people use equity and equality interchangeably
and they're not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess in some weird setting they could be, but typically speaking, they're not interchangeable. And equity is one thing, and equality is another. And so we're gonna talk about some of the differences there. But let's talk a little bit about your education as well, because you've done some education throughout the years.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people don't know this, but I left high school in the beginning of 10th grade. I was in the foster care system at the time, way down south in Alabama.
I knew that.
In Alabama.
That's right.
And I ended up getting my GED when I was like 16. And I didn't return to school until much, much later. And as I entered the four-year university system, I was a grandmother in my late 30s and moved on from UW Oshkosh, Urban and Regional Studies, with the minor in GIS, and then on to my master's degree in urban planning with UW Milwaukee in just as recent as 2013. So I'm still a little bit current.
Yeah. Well, and those things are, they're valuable pieces of knowledge, that every little thing that we do, whether it's a class we take, whether it's a degree we get, or a committee we serve on, or whatever, it's all, I view it as little pieces to the puzzle of what make us who we are, but also in your case, make you, I feel, again, and this is just my feeling, make you the candidate who should be elected to serve, to succeed Gordon Hintz. Because you are those things, and people can rest assured that if they call Lori Palmeri with a question, a concern, they're going to get a response.
And even if I don't have the answer, which I'm perfectly comfortable
You've sought it
saying.
out for me on many
I will,
occasions.
be proud to try to find out that answer or connect you with someone who can, because I am completely humble enough to say when I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like I really enjoy that part because I am curious about learning more.
Yeah.
And you can't expect our elected officials to know every operational thing.
Right.
And so it's always an opportunity for me to learn more too.
Sure. Well, and I think that's great. So I do have one question before we get into kind of the meat of your campaign, Lori. If you get elected, you would take office when? January?
Yes.
It would be in January. So how does that line up with your current term as mayor? And would you give one up? Or could you legally and mentally maintain both positions until your
Sure.
mayoral seat?
So
takes place?
technically, yes, it is permissible. And the mayor's term, or my term as a council member and mayor, would be concluding in April of next year. So there would be a couple of months of
Yeah.
overlap. And yes, technically it is permissible for me to serve in both. Whether or not that's, realistic, I think that I've got enough experience with the current role that I could. But I will have to see what things look like in that time period because, it is looking at going from kind of the big fish in the little pond to the little fish in the big pond kind of thing. So I'll have to make that determination as we look at November.
But at the most, it would be 3 months.
Yes.
And,
yes.
Or give or take a few days.
Yes.
So that wouldn't be too terribly bad, I don't think. But
I think it's manageable.
yeah, well, that's good. So one of the issues that you put on your website, you're calling it Faces of Oshkosh.
Yes.
FACES.
Yes.
And that stands for several issues altogether. So why don't we, let's take the F in Faces. What is that all about? Let's talk about that.
Well, as I said, I am running for the people, and that being the voice, their representative voice in Madison. But those voices have faces. And, I do better with keeping my thoughts organized with these little devices called mnemonics. And I do, when I think about the things that I've learned, I think about the faces and the people that I have met along this journey so far. And FACES stands for, fair wages and taxes, access to affordable housing, a clean environment, including reliable, safe, clean drinking water, an expanded access to health care, along with mental health, substance use, caregiver support, and a strong public education. The faces of Oshkosh are the folks that are sitting around their kitchen tables and they're dealing with these regular issues. And so it's just a very simple way of saying I want to be the representative for the people and what they're experiencing.
Okay, well, let's start with the fair wages and taxes. And I'm going to give you another pat on the back here, Lori, because I don't think, at least to the best of my knowledge, whenever you were running for city council or for mayor, and now for this, to the best of my knowledge, I have never heard you say, I am going to do this, or I am going to do that. And you see so many candidates doing that, and it's like nails on a chalkboard to me, because one person can't do anything by themselves.
Right.
So to sit there and say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, that's being disingenuous right out of the box. Say, I will work toward changing this or accomplishing this, but you can't just do it. And so to promise it, that's unfair,
Promises are very challenging, and I agree with you. That can be rather intimidating or not intimidating, but disingenuous to hear campaign promises. It's not just a cliche, right? So I try to think about the efforts, and I will work as hard as I can, and I will fight for those things. But I do recognize it's not alone, and especially when we're looking at the environment that is Madison at the current moment. I'm not interested in going down and joining a club. Not really interested in the whole gamesmanship, but I am interested in solving problems with others. And
yes.
that's very important,
Yeah.
right?
And working across the aisle.
Exactly.
You don't have to do that here in Oshkosh because these are nonpartisan races on
Well,
the council.
in some ways, that's true. But in practice, sometimes you still have 7 different personalities
exactly.
that
and
you have to meet
where
in the
their
middle on
leanings
things.
are.
Yes.
So yes, that's true. You do have to play well with others. But it will be very apparent in Madison. And, because there are some people, and you and I both know this, there are some elected officials who, they're going to hold tight to touting that Republican or Democratic line, and nonpartisan stuff be damned, they will not reach across the aisle even if there's a good idea there. And I think that that's more Republican in nature than it is Democratic in nature. But we both know that there are people on both sides who won't budge. But that's why I do like Tony Evers, one of his commercials right now, that, he says he doesn't care if it's a Republican idea or a Democratic idea, as long as it's a good idea. And that's what it should all be, any good idea. People should be able to rally around that and support it, no matter who came up with it, because if it's a good idea, then everybody wins,
Right, absolutely.
So, okay, so fair wages and taxes. What do you think a fair wage should be? Are you happy with where the minimum wage is right now?
Not especially. That would be a no. But I mean, obviously, it depends on where you're living, too. In Wisconsin today, if you're in a more urban, metropolitan area, more rural area, or something in between, like us, right? But I mean, I think that if you're going to be able to afford and access housing or health care or the resources that you need or an education, that really can't happen less than $20 an hour unless you're in a very, co-living arrangement where there's, lots of folks sharing resources, right? But in any event, no, I think we have to be beyond that in order for folks to be able to sustain themselves. And certainly, when it comes to fair taxes, I mean, let's talk about the fact that I think you probably had this conversation numerous times with Gordon, I would imagine. I know we certainly have, and he was working on this along with others. The the shared revenue shrinking. I think that it's gone. Let's see, a 47% decline from 1996 to 2020.
Wait, give that to me again, Lori. 47%.
47% decline from 1996 to 2020. That's adjusted for inflation. And then if you look at a share of that state budget and that support for counties and municipalities, let's see, 1996, 11.5% down to 4.5% in 2020. I mean, how can that be fair for folks who are paying in and then it's not coming back
exactly
in an equitable fashion?
Right, and that to me is another unkept promise, because that shared revenue was always promised to come back to the communities, which I always thought was kind of a stupid thing, because just let the communities keep it and the state just say, okay, we need X percent from you, and send that off to Madison and let the communities keep the rest of the money. But this is a classic example of why they like the system as it is, because they can keep taking more and more, keeping more and more, and yet those unfunded mandates come down the pike. And what are you supposed to do? Where are we supposed to get the money from?
And that forces municipalities such as Oshkosh and others to, become so creative in ways to kind of make up the difference for those critical services, right? And folks start having issues with fees or other kind of creeping in costs, but it has to be paid somewhere.
Right.
And so you do see that. I mean, obviously, there are some city issues that we've been talking about trying to tackle to, balance those gaps. But certainly it's very frustrating.
Yeah. Well, it is. And like I said, Madison, as well as the federal government, but Madison tends to put forth these mandates, but they're unfunded. And, some of the more recent ones that I can remember had to do with, like, the EPA and stuff like that, water runoff. And that's actually a big one that I remember in not recent history, but when did Oshkosh, this was probably before you started serving on council, but when did Oshkosh have to put in these fees for water runoff?
Well, I would say that probably, I don't know the exact date, but I would say that probably coincided, about the same time that there are some requirements for us to have clean drinking water,
right,
and bathing and so on and so forth. The those TMDLs, those total maximum load, and the phosphorus runoff and things like that. There was probably a coincidence in timing with the time that we really needed to put our feet to the fire and start addressing that.
Sure.
And instituting more of the infrastructure that was needed. But if we go back to the the fair tax piece of this too. I mean, how fair is it that, some of the lawmakers, lawmakers in general, reduced the support to the communities, but at the same time gave some pretty significant tax cuts to the ultra wealthy? I mean, where is the fairness in that?
Well, there's not, and that's why Joe Biden wanted to make some of the changes that he promised to make, because that's not just a state thing, that's a national thing. But I just want to go back to this talking about clean water and something that became an unfunded mandate. The homeowners are funding it. It's if you live in Oshkosh and you look at the back of your water bill, we are charged X number of units based on, and correct me if I'm wrong on this because it's been a while, but I do think I remember this. We're, depending on what our property size is, we are based X number of units of impervious surface.
Yeah, and I think they use a calculation with the roof.
Yes.
I believe, for residential.
Yep. And obviously impervious surface is that surface like a driveway or a sidewalk that water can't go through. So that was probably, like I said, the one of the more recent, even though it wasn't just like recent, unfunded mandates that I think hit a lot of people hard.
Well, and I mean, it's important that we do continue to grow as a city, but certainly I think in a smart way, ways that we are, offsetting some of those impervious surfaces. And, we've started instituting some of those things. But statewide, certainly there are requirements that, our community affects another community. I mean, if you look at something upstream in terms of runoff, right, we ultimately are treating for those things that are running off from outside of here. And some of those communities may have lower taxes. So it all ties into this kind of muddy soup, if you will. Muddy soup
is right, and it all comes back on the little guy. And the little guy only has so much money to go around. We are not getting raises at our jobs or within our businesses like the state lawmakers are giving raises to themselves and federal lawmakers are giving raises to themselves, and all these costs keep going up these days especially, but people's income isn't. We can't keep up with the rate of inflation and the rate of, people just bilking people. I mean, look at the price of gas. That's just one classic example. I think that President Biden, needs to step in and say, enough. You can't keep these high prices at this rate, for gas. And then maybe we'd see other things come down. But that's not, thankfully, you don't have to worry about that in Madison.
Well, there are gas taxes that we have at the state level too,
Sure.
certainly. But
Yeah.
I do think, I also, have a day job. Like I said, I'm a working mother, a working grandmother. Aside from council and that, and I drive as a medical courier for a company who, has contracts here in the area, and certainly our fees have not necessarily gone up directly in relation to the gas amount. So that cuts in, and the more it costs me for gas and the more it costs me for new tires or service or brakes or alignments and all of those things, it certainly is starting to, it gets a little squeezed. And that equates everywhere, whether it's distribution of goods or services, those are continually going up. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens later this year.
So is there anything more that you would like to say on fair wages and taxes, or should we move on?
Well, I think we can move on. I think
Okay.
we can move on for now to make sure we have enough time to
let's
cover
talk
all
about
of it.
affordable housing. And I'll let you talk about that for a moment, and then I have something that I want to ask.
Sure. And, when we talk about affordable housing, oftentimes we're also missing that there are different categories of affordable housing, right? In the planning world, we talk about affordable housing for the extremely low, the very low, the moderate, and on up in terms of, basically it comes down to 30% of your earnings that you could afford to spend on housing. And it kind of relates back to the first one. Well, it directly relates back to the first one on whether or not you're getting paid a fair wage and can afford that.
Right.
But accessible to affordable housing, whether or not it's home ownership or whether or not it's renting, certainly we have seen some positive movement, but we've also seen, a stock that has been reduced across not just Oshkosh, but across the state. And communities are trying to make up this gap in housing stock, so that shrinking supply and the increased demand has certainly created that, along with what's going on nationally, I believe. And there are a multitude of ways in which we can address that. Yes, we can address it at the local level, but there are other state programs, and I think things that we look at in terms of not just the affordability factor from the user of the home, but the producer, right? The builders or the companies that are rehabilitating currently or formerly built older homes. We at the city level, they did a study here, but I'm not sure that I've seen, and I'm educating myself more at the state level now. Certainly it's a big learning curve looking at those things. But, for those who are the most vulnerable, whether or not you've got a disability or mobility issues or mental health challenges or are coming out of treatment or coming out of incarceration, that's when we get back to this equity versus equality discussion, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Because there are some times when we need help. I mean, certainly, we've had family members stay with us from time to time who had circumstances that were, they were in need. But not everybody has the ability to do that. And not everybody has the willingness to do that.
Right.
We do, from what I understand recently, we have seen more single member households. And so, are younger people, maybe, I don't know the answer to this, I'm just saying this rhetorically, are younger people a little less tolerant of sharing their space? Or is it, folks are hanging on up at the upper level of the filtering from the very low into the moderate, are because there's less supply, folks are staying in these houses longer because there's not something for them to move up into to allow those in that less affordable to move up to the next category.
Well, I want to touch on something that you just mentioned about there being less supply. And that's interesting because, see, I don't view it as less supply. Maybe less supply of single-family homes, perhaps. But, I mean, I look at the apartment buildings that are going up in this community. Number one, I don't know where all the people are coming from to fill these. I really don't. And I don't know how people are affording these really high rents. $1,200, $1,500, you know. That may fly in Madison or Milwaukee, but for that kind of rent to be the norm in Oshkosh, that's, I mean, it knocks you off your feet, really, because I don't know how people are affording it.
Well, and when you talk about less supply, I think what I should have said is as new households are formed, as people age and start new homes or new households, you know, that's adding to the demand, right?
Right.
And, you know, there are folks who are at the end of life who may be staying, you know, in their homes longer. Affordability of, you know, assisted living or nursing homes has certainly made that very difficult. But yes, I should have probably phrased it a little bit differently.
Well, but we got it now.
Yeah.
I still don't understand how people are affording these high rents, and I don't know where all these people
You know,
are
it's
coming
interesting
from.
about that too, because you know we've had questions about that. You know, certainly over the last year and a half, and I think Oshkosh was maybe under the market for a while, and we kind of became accustomed to that. And so I know when I first moved here, I was kind of surprised at, you know, what the availability was and the less availability of habitable, right? Because certainly we have a huge percent of our housing stock that is pre-World War II, aging, and whether or not it's been cared for properly and maintained. I mean, you do an excellent job of maintaining your home. We do the best we can. Others who are maybe renting them out, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
And you and I have both served on the Rental Housing Advisory Committee that,
for sure.
that relates to some of those issues.
Absolutely.
That was because of that, really, here.
Yeah.
And that was a struggle at the state.
Yeah.
You know, there are folks down there in Madison who, you know, they have interest in those things.
Well, but I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying, Lori, about the fact that Oshkosh may have been on the low end for a while, but I still don't understand how people are affording it, because even though, as you're saying, the rent is kind of catching up to where maybe it should have been, or where it needs to be, it's people's wages haven't gone up that high, you know, and you hit on $20 an hour before. You know,
And that's on the lower end, really,
Yes.
of affordable.
So when you've got a job that's paying you $20 an hour and is 40 hours a week, that's $1,600. That's $3,200 a month. And if you're renting an apartment that is $1,200 a month, that's a third of. You know, and we're
And
not
I don't
even
know if a
we're not
single
even talking
person-
net. We're
Right.
talking gross money.
Right.
So that is a third of what your gross
Yeah, and I
salary
don't know
is,
how
and
many
that's a
folks.
lot.
I don't know how many folks at that you know, income level are, you know, taking on a $1,200 a month place on their own. I would imagine you're seeing more like two of those folks taking those things on together. You know,
but it's still high.
it is a bit higher.
When you
absolutely.
figure your car
I
payments
think
that most people
the
have.
last time I helped someone try to look for a place, you know, we were hard pressed for finding, and this would have been even 6 months ago, finding any kind of one bedroom or, you know, decent studio for less than $750. And you know, some of the newer places, I think, for example, next door here at the beach, I think they're in the $800 to $850 for
At
you
the
know
be-
a
the
singular.
beach. You mean the beach
the
building?
beach building where they had the new construction. So I don't know what their rents are at right now, but certainly we have seen some of the higher end. And again, there's, you know, kind of a strategy, you know, not just in Oshkosh, but in other cities who are struggling with this too, to create opportunities for affordable, accessible housing for those who can only afford like $500 a month. There's a huge disparity of availability there,
Yes.
but then also creating on the other end of that for those who are on the upper end availability so that folks can filter through.
So that brings me to one of my questions, and it's a statewide question because you may come up with this or be faced with this at the state level. But on the city level, now I know that the city is looking at building some tiny homes.
No, it's not the city actually.
Okay, who is
It's a
it?
private foundation. I think that's the Oshkosh Kids Foundation.
Okay, but it had to be approved by the city. That's
yes,
what it was.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there
So
was actually a grant that the county got on that
Okay.
from the state, by the way. A very, very generous grant that was included in. But it's
Okay.
but
So-
it is in physically
so the city's
in the
not
city.
paying for it, but it's in the city and you guys had to approve it. But so it's for tiny homes. It's attractive. I don't know how large the property is, but it is a tract of land where tiny homes are going to be built to help people transition from maybe they're just coming out of incarceration. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they have been in poor health and now they have to kind of get back into the market. So they're going to be using these tiny homes to transition from that into something bigger and better. But here's my question. I mean, number one, how long do they have to transition? But more importantly, my second question, I'm an HGTV buff. So
DIY. So are you?
I'm not a DIY person.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Okay.
No. Well, I'm trying
But
to get
that's what
better.
a lot of those shows are.
I-
It's like DIY, and then somebody else has to come in and fix the DIY when you don't know what you're doing.
No, I'm more. I like to watch where people are going to buy for homes, what they're buying for the money, and just anything. And I don't know if they still have it, but they had a series called Tiny Houses or
I
Tiny
remember
Homes or
that.
something like that.
I remember that. It
You
was
know,
quite the trend, and I don't think the trend has gone away.
It is a trend. It is a trend, yes. And it's not just for people who need to find their first home and then transition into something else. It's people who want to downsize and live a more minimalistic kind of lifestyle, getting back to basics, and you're living in maybe 500, 450 square feet.
Well, if you think about the
You know.
post-World War II, like Sears homes, and that they were, right around 1,200 and under, right? Maybe between 800 and 1,200 square feet. And, certainly I think that if you think about things like inclusionary zoning and exclusionary zoning, then you start talking about these like minimum lot sizes and minimum square footage and things like that. I think we're ready, and we are seeing this in some areas where those things are getting adjusted in a way that's a little more reasonable. Do we necessarily need to have, I don't know about you, but when we were growing up, me and my sisters, we had to share a bedroom,
Well,
That's
it
a
was
little
just
bit
my
different.
brother and
Oh,
I,
okay.
so we each had our own bedroom. But I understand about people sharing. Even the Brady kids shared bedrooms, right?
I mean, it just seems like, we kind of moved into this kind of affluent need or thought we needed to have, our own TVs, our own bathrooms, our own this and that. And certainly I'm not judging anybody for
Yeah.
having that. But I think it's more about not necessarily downsizing, but right sizing and allowing more room, such as, or more units per parcel, where it can work out. I mean, I think that in this particular case that you're referring to, it's not like the Madison tiny home, I think, pilot program they did, 5 or 10 years ago. This is a little bit more supported in that there's a potential, shared communal space and things like that. But if you think about it, that's kind of what happens with like condos. It's just that when we think of condos, we think of condos as being vertical, right? Individually owned, but shared walls or whatever. I mean, this is a little more spread out rather than it's horizontal versus vertical.
Yeah. So here's my thing. I'm totally supportive of this tiny home thing that the city is approving. And by the way, who is it that's going to oversee that?
I am not 100% sure.
Can you
about
find out
that.
for me?
I want to say there's a partnership, and one of the partners may be Advocap, but I'd hate to misspeak on that.
Well, that would kind of fit in with what they do. So I could see that. But if you could find out that for me, because I do have questions about, how long does someone have to graduate from the program and have to look for and move into someplace else.
I think it's kind of, as I recall, it's an extended period of time, but I don't know the exact amount of time. And I believe they're still finalizing some of those things too. And as I understand it, the county executive is working with some of those partner agencies, because that was part of that $10 million grant they got from the state.
Okay.
That, along with the homeless shelter, and I believe Habitat, and it was under the neighborhood investment grant, I believe.
Okay.
So
well,
that's something that the county
we're running out of time, and
yes.
I want to make sure that you have time to get into everything. But this tiny home thing, I mean, you're still the mayor here,
yes,
and hopefully you will be until next April. But I would like to see Oshkosh, it go with a tiny home concept. Find land, find a developer, and put up a bunch of tiny homes. You can still tax them, you just can't tax them as much, but because a lot of people, they want to live by themselves, or they may just
want some privacy, sure.
They want to downsize. They don't want all this crap. And in a small place like that, you can't have a bunch of stuff. You've got to live a minimalistic but very simplistic lifestyle. And that, they say from even an emotional sense that when you have less stuff, you have less issues.
Are you saying we need to Marie Kondo the city?
No. No, but I do think that we need to, if we're going to offer things to people on all different kinds of levels. I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts from a city standpoint now?
Well,
do you agree with that?
I've long been a fan of that since I first went into graduate school, and had just kind of learned about that really in like 2011, and I've had those conversations over the years with not just our planning department, but the APA conferences, certainly other communities seeing what they were doing, and I do believe that tiny is different to different folks, right? Mm-hmm. It's relative. But certainly I think we are also starting to see some of these proposals come through that are, like I said, they might not be tiny, but they may be less McMansion-ish, right? Mm-hmm. And right sizing. Let's call it cozy. But we are starting to see some of those things come through, or even allowing for fewer parking spaces. Some folks are, even going carless, certainly. But at the state level, I think recognizing those communities that works for, but without giving up that local control. Certainly, we still need to see that, but also giving access, making it equitable access to land where available, and allowing for density incentives and things like that. I'm not even saying, like here in Oshkosh, that we would only go dense in the central city, but start filling some of the other infill around the edges as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And just one other thing, as far as, you made a good point that tiny is different from one person to another person, but maybe have some land where you can have some tiny homes built, different square footages, but then you could also have land where if people wanted to buy or have built a tiny home for them, where they could, buy the land then for that.
It's really interesting that you bring that up, because I'm going to switch gears a little bit to mobile homes. So I was listening to your program.
It's kind of on that.
Yes, I was listening to a program not too long ago with public radio, and they were talking about the removing the stigma of and othering of manufactured homes. And when I was a kid, there were many times where we lived in what we called trailers down south, and I remember one of the places we lived was called King Arthur Trailer Court. It was anything but royal. But certainly, there are different applications in different climates, safety concerns and things like that. But certainly, this othering and this kind of stigmatizing of manufactured housing, I think we have to look at a cultural shift away from that, because that may be one of our ways of making homes more affordable.
Okay, good. We're down to about 8 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So let's move on to clean environment. How are you going to help state residents with clean environment?
So I've long been interested in a clean environment, in sustainability, in resiliency. And certainly, that's kind of a catch-all for many things. My first board that I served on in the city was the Sustainability Advisory Board. And at the time, I was just coming off of, finishing up my degree in that. But, we have to think about things like conservation rates, water conservation rates, tiered structures that I think it's important to think about things like with the PSC, the ability to removing barriers to create both conservation rates and what I call the lifeline rate. Okay. So that basic hygiene block of water. So let's say you are on a fixed income and you only do one load of laundry and a couple of showers a week and maybe a few dishes or whatever. The ability for human dignity to have that basic hygiene at a lower rate, and then as you use more, you're going to pay more. Currently, some communities, such as Oshkosh and others, it's the other way around. The more you use, the less you pay, depending on pipe size and all these other things.
Yeah.
But certainly, I think that we have to look at conservation rates, and I think we have to also not just look at quantity and availability there, but the quality of the water. And I myself am not going to be the magic fixer on that, but certainly I will fight like heck for us to keep our clean drinking water, keep PFAS out, keep the polluters accountable, to test and make sure that we know what we're dealing with. There are so many things that we can do with green infrastructure. We frequently work with, gray infrastructure, your detention ponds, retention ponds, and, lots of culverts, lots of runoff situations. Sometimes we're dredging and rerouting things when we really could get some volume impact from some of these smaller green infrastructure projects, such as permeable pavers, and allowing those things through that uniform building code. Quite honestly, I mean, that's just like one small drop in that little topic. Okay. Or that huge topic.
Healthcare.
Healthcare, yes.
That's a big one, and you don't have we've got other things to get to, and so you don't have much time.
So what I would say is, absolutely, we're spending a lot of money trying to cover few people because, we did not take that expanded Medicaid.
And that falls back on former Governor Scott Walker.
Absolutely.
We lost a ton of money in this state because of that stupid decision that he made.
And, over the years, it's no secret, our family, along with many families, there have been folks who have really struggled with getting access to either mental health or substance use treatment. I can use one example, which I absolutely love that the state has done, but there are only 2 pilots for anybody who has got a chronic mental illness who has had to have inpatient. Right now, you have got to go through an emergency room in order to go inpatient. When you have a known chronic mental health condition and you're recognizing that you need that extra help, you should not have to go through the trauma of an emergency room in order to get into an inpatient bed.
Or the expense.
Or the expense. And sometimes that's at the taxpayer's expense because it's so much more expensive to go that route.
Right.
There are some other things, some other tools that are really cool that we've done, but we need to expand, and that includes these pilot. There were 2 locations in the state. One is called Iris. I don't remember the name of the other one in the western part of the state, but they allow folks who have chronic mental health issues to go into those locations and kind of a reset, working with peers, peer respite centers, to avoid, and I'm not saying when you're acute and you're suicidal, but I'm talking about when you're starting to need that extra help. it does and has prevented numerous inpatient stays and other. That's just like one little piece, right?
Okay.
But additionally, folks with substance issues, we have a lot of programs and a lot of nonprofits and a lot of really well-meaning people, but we certainly have to expand the availability of training for peer respite specialists and coaches.
All right. Let's touch on strong public schools for about a minute, because there are some other things that I definitely want to get to.
Yes.
We don't have a whole lot of time to do that.
Strong public education. Well, I mean, it's interesting because I was watching someone that we mentioned earlier speak a few years ago about the answer to a stronger economy was a stronger education. And interestingly, also that person and that party don't necessarily support that strong education through funding them, but rather reducing what's available there. And we have to have the funds in order to pay our teachers, our caregivers, our preschool workers, our daycare workers, in order. And that also relates to a healthy economy. Absolutely. Sure. We have to have those strong educational opportunities for folks and recovering with resilience from what has been very difficult last few years that has challenged those already challenged resources.
Okay. All right. Real quickly, I'm not going to call it a lightning round, but just real quickly.
Yes.
Your opponent, who I mentioned before, Donnie Herman, does not live in the 54th State Assembly District. I see that as a big challenge.
Yeah, I
and
did.
Isn't it against the law? Don't they have to live in the district? I believe they do, because when Carol Ressler was our state senator, she had a house down on Jackson Street, but she was hardly ever there. She was living in Madison, and that was a no-no.
Well, I really intend to run a clean, positive campaign. However, if asked on something like that, I don't know the absolute address, but I do know what I have seen on the nomination papers that were filed, and that address does not appear to be in the district. There may be legal reasons why they don't have to at the time that they're running. I think there have been some changes in the laws, too, that allow even circulators for, papers and that to live outside the district. But certainly it would be interesting to ask someone's commitment level. If they love that community, why might they not live in that same area?
So I want to get your thoughts on broadband. There is, by the way, there is a website. It is psc.wi.us. So psc.wi.us. And you can get a ton of information there on where broadband is in the state of Wisconsin, what internet options are available to you depending on where you live. But, years ago, I just thought, I think I've got to pay for my own internet. I think everybody should pay for their own. But you know what? Times have changed now, and I have rethought my views on this because times have changed. Everything is on the internet now. Oh my God, 1 minute they're telling me, do you support broadband?
Absolutely.
Being done statewide.
It's not a luxury anymore. It's a necessity. There's no question. It's an equity issue. It's a rural issue. I know a family member who had to drop out of college because it went virtual. They moved out into an area where there wasn't strong internet, and absolutely, it's a must.
Okay, and I just want to make this point, and if there's time, you can just answer real quickly. But the Oregon-Jackson Street Bridge, here we are at the beginning of the boating season, and it is mechanical issues. So one part of the ramp is up and the other one is down. It's closed to vehicular and pedestrian traffic. Boating public can get through. But I said to you guys many years ago when this was an option, I said we should get away from having the drawbridges because they're mechanical, they break down, they need repair, and they cost money. Put in a high enough bridge, and they're telling me I got to go.
Oh, well, there are those options coming, and that has
Good.
to do with maintenance and state and
Good.
city responsibilities.
I'm glad to see someone's finally looking at what I've said.
Look at option C3 on the multiple options that are going to be presented.
All right.
So,
Lori, thanks so much for being
Thank you.
here. I'm sorry we ran out of time, but it's fun.
always fun.
Always.
To be
always.
continued.
Absolutely. And good luck with your race. Again, the website for Lori is palmeriforassembly.com. That's going to do it for us. Thank you very much to Lori. Thank you to the crew and to you for joining us. We will see you next time. Until then, take care. Get registered to vote. Remember your election days, August 9th and November 8th. And we will see you next time. Thank you for watching, and keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.